and yes, hello to everyone that is attending. A quick introduction from ourselves first. My name is Hugh Murphy. I'm the head of collections and content in the library. Looking at the attendees, probably most of you may know that already. And you'll certainly know my colleague, Dr. Ruth O'Hara, who works with me on the open access publishing side of things in terms of author processing charges and journals with OA content. So what we are going to talk to you about today is kind of a complement to Kieran Quinn's talk earlier in the week, which some of you were at. We're really talking about sort of getting published via open access in scholarly journals. We've done a lot of deals nationally that facilitate that, and there's a huge array of options. And we'll go through the good and the bad of this, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll all know at least how to do it. And then, of course, it's over to you as to whether you want to do it. So we'll push on then, and again, I'll introduce my colleague Ruth, and Ruth will go through quite a bit of this, and I'll come in at the end. Thanks.
That's great, Hugh. Thanks a million, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be talking to you about open access publishing in Maynooth. Today, really, we just want to give you an overview, as Hugh said, about the options that you as researchers or library staff have to publish your work open access. I'm sure you're all aware that there's been a fundamental shift happening globally towards making research more transparent and collaborative and accessible. And Maynooth University, as a member of the IRL consortium, has played its part in helping this transition towards more cost-neutral open access. And we've done this by working to secure an unprecedented number of open access agreements with key scholarly publishers. And these are across a wide breadth of subject areas, and we'll look at these in more detail in a second. But just to give you a sense of what we want to look at today, we'll look at what open access is and what open access publishing is, but in particular, we want to look at the agreements that are in place with publishers that allow you to publish your research open access in thousands of journals at no cost to yourselves. We look at the library supports and resources that are available to help you in this process. And we want to look at the many benefits that are there to publish your work open access. And finally, Hugh will look at some of the alternative ways of publishing your research open access beyond the kind of publisher funded models. So just for a brief explanation of what open access is, but like everything in this, this explanation is just one of many that there are about open access publishing. But really open access literature, when we talk about it, we're talking about digital, online and free of charge literature. And a really important thing for researchers as well is that it's free of most of the copyright and licensing restrictions that are more obvious in the more traditional publishing models. So open access articles are those that are freely available online to everybody who wants to access them. And open access publishing is part of a wider open movement that encourages a free exchange of knowledge and resources in order to widen access and encourage creativity. So it's a good thing. That I'm sure you're all aware of that. In terms of what types of open access there are, we just want to look at the two main types today: gold open access and green open access. Gold open access, what I'm going to be looking at first off is publisher provided open access. And then the green open access is self-archiving or author provided open access. So to look at the gold open access options for you. Gold open access allows the final published version of a research publication to be made free to read immediately on the publisher's website. So some journals will have fully open access, which means all the papers are freely accessible. But then there's the hybrid open access model. And it's in this case that there's a subscription-based journal, and it'll have a mixture of open access content and then content that readers must pay for. In both cases, not surprisingly, there are costs associated with publishing, and these need to be met. So all hybrid and some fully open access journals will charge an author a one-off fee or an article processing charge to have their article published open access. And the average cost of these is around €3,000. So it's a substantial amount of money we're talking about. In the traditional publishing model, this charge is in addition to a subscription fee that are charged for libraries or readers to access content. And this is often referred to as double dipping when we talk about publishing. So while the move by publishers to include more open access is obviously a great thing, there are still flaws, to put it very mildly, in the system, because you have a subscription fee, but you also have these processing charges as extra. And the costs involved in this model of scholarly publishing are really soaring every year. And as a result, publishers are making outlandish profits, even though the deals are still really limited in terms of reader access. Hugh gave me a really good statistic that shows the top publishers are more profitable than 97% of PLCs and more profitable than big brands like Apple, Google, and BMW, which is really mind-blowing. And because of that, it's probably not surprising that over the past number of years, there's been a global push to change this model and to shift the contracted payments from libraries to publishers away from this subscription-based reading and towards more open access publishing. And we've been involved in this because we're members of IRL. We've been trying to negotiate and sign a number of deals. There's an unprecedented number of deals have been signed that are called transformative agreements. They can be referred to as read and publish, publish and read, offsetting agreements as well. These agreements have fundamentally altered how libraries and institutions pay for journal content. Each agreement is different, but the overarching goal remains the same. And this is to move from the old model where subscription was paid to publishers to get access to content, with an additional article processing charge paid on top of this, to agreements that cover both the read element of the subscription and the article processing charge, the publishing element, in one annual fee. So in addition, these agreements also seek to repurpose subscription fees as well. They ensure a significant number of articles are published open access, and that's obviously really important. So the APCs, those article processing charges, traditionally associated with publishing open access articles, are no longer paid by the author, but they're covered by their institutions through these agreements. And then articles that are submitted for publication in the journals that are part of these agreements are published open access for all to read. So in this way, transformative agreements are helping to further the move towards greater open access publishing. There's still a way to go, but it's definitely a start. And these agreements are more transparent and fair. In addition to making the agreements publicly available, they also allow authors or other institutions to retain copyright to their publications. And this is by requiring that publications are published under an open license, preferably a Creative Commons attribution license. And that's really important for researchers. So that's kind of an overview of what the transformative agreements are, but what does it mean for researchers in Maynooth, and what do you have access to? So thanks to the transformative agreements, the academic community in Maynooth can publish their research open access immediately in over 15,000 journal titles across 20 publishers. The inclusion of a set number of APC waivers, these article processing charge waivers, in the agreements mean that researchers can publish a significant number of their articles open access at no extra cost to themselves. And this represents a globally unprecedented transition to cost-neutral open access. So you can publish more articles open access at no cost to yourselves. And we're really happy to report that there's been a huge uptake of all the OA deals amongst the academic community in Maynooth, and it's really great to see. And in real terms, the uptake that's happened, it would have cost over €200,000 of research or facing charges. So researchers would have had to pay these APCs, but this €200,000 has been covered by the transformative agreements that are there, which is great. Just to give you some sense of the breadth of the deals, on the next slide is just a list of the publishers that are involved, that have signed agreements with us. And the graph is an ESAC graph, and it just shows you the exponential growth of articles that have been enabled open access in Ireland over the last few years, thanks to these transformative agreements. And it's all going in one direction, thankfully, which is great. So there are lots of deals and there are lots of publishers, which means that no one deal is the same. But the avenues, it also means the avenues for publishing your research open access have never been greater, and it's never been easier to publish open access. And the processes of publishing your work open access are really quite straightforward. But we thought today we'd just take a quick look at a typical author workflow to give you a sense of what's involved and show you that there is really no obstacle to publishing open access with these deals. So the example I use here is from Springer Nature, but I will say that each publisher has an equally easy step-by-step guide to follow. So you submit your article and it has all the relevant information, and then the paper is peer reviewed. And your article then is editorially accepted for publication. An author then will receive an email link to complete the publishing agreement. And this is really important to be asked there to identify yourself then as being connected to Maynooth, so you can avail of the deal. And you'll also be asked to confirm that you want to publish your article open access, with the article fees covered under the agreement. And I'll give you an example there of a message that is sent to someone when they submit their paper to Springer Nature. And you can see that at the bottom it says, I want to publish my article open access with my fees covered. Yes, submit for approval. And that's basically what you have to do. It's at that point then that the article is sent to us, to myself or you in the library, for verification of eligibility and approval. And we do this via a publisher's dashboard. Show you what that looks like there. Again, this is from Springer Nature. But this is what we see, typically what we see when an article comes to us for approval. We're given details about the author, their connection to Maynooth, the article itself, and the journal that the article is to be published in. So what do? We check that you're a corresponding author, as a corresponding author, that you're associated with Maynooth, so that you're the person who's handling the manuscript and the correspondent during the whole publication process. And you're a member of Maynooth staff or student at the point of submission of your article. And we also check that you've used your Maynooth email address. And this is really important, again, for verifying your eligibility. And we also check that the journal you want to publish in is part of the deal. So just as the author workflow with the publishers are not the same, these are the three main things we're always checking for. Your corresponding author is part of Maynooth, you've used your institutional affiliation, and that the journal title is part of the deal. And then if approved, and we always want to approve your articles, you'll again receive an email from the publisher, not from us in the library, detailing the next steps. And at that point, your article is available immediately online at no cost to you. So it really is very obvious how to go through these processes with most of the publishers. Each deal is different, and in addition to the publisher's website, you can find out all you need to know about making your research available open access through the library's open access LibGuides. And I know Kieran probably went through this as well. And you can find details here about all of the agreements that we have, things like the Creative Commons licenses and lots of other information about open access publishing more generally. And then, of course, there's also the IRL open access agreement page, which is really handy if you just want to see if the publisher is involved. You can type in the publisher's details there. And of course, you can always contact myself and Hugh directly if you have any questions, and our emails will be at the end of this presentation as well. But to finish off this section of the presentation, I just want to look at the many benefits that there are to you for publishing your research open access. I mentioned the ease of doing it, and it's obviously a great incentive. It's often easier to publish open access than in any other way, but there's lots of other advantages too. I mentioned earlier that there's a global shift towards open access publishing and a growing uptake of articles published open access through transformative agreements. Again, I include an ESEC graph here, which estimates that nearly 60% of Ireland's open access research has been published through transformative agreements, which is really interesting. And then there's lots of data that shows the positive impact of publishing open access for the visibility and use of research. And I've just included some statistics here from three major publishers, Wiley, Springer Nature, and Taylor and Francis. If we look at the Wiley one, it notes that on average, there's 3 times more downloads of articles that are open access when compared to subscription articles, that they're cited nearly twice as much when compared to subscription articles, and they receive over 4 times more automatic attention as well. And Taylor and Francis states something similar, that articles published open access with them have received 6 times as many downloads. I think we can safely say, if these big publishers are saying that open access publishing is making such an impact this way, in reality, it's probably even more of an impact is happening on the visibility and use of your research. So open access publishing works, basically. But even beyond the increase in visibility and higher citation rates, it's also the case that an increasing number of authors are required to publish open access by their funders, by their institution, or by their employers as well, because this push is happening. And also, as I mentioned before, when publishing open access, you will usually get the choice of a Creative Commons license. And these liberal licenses allow you to retain copyright, and they can offer more opportunities for research to be reused, allowing others to build on your work. And it shows that your work can have greater impact as well if other people are able to draw on it and include it in their own research, while also crediting your work as they're doing it. And something that's become very apparent over the last 2 years is that open access has the potential to have an influence beyond academia. And access to research can help inform policymakers, lead to research breakthroughs, and improve everyday lives. And I think we've all seen that during the COVID pandemic, because coronavirus studies were made freely available to all. And Taylor and Francis had a good statistic on just one particular article. It was called Pandemics, Tourism and Global Change, a Rapid Assessment of COVID-19. It was published open access in December of 2020, and it was picked up, well, it was April of 2020, it was picked up by 2 news outlets, and it received nearly 180,000 downloads between the April and December of that year, which is huge numbers. So ensuring that research is conducted for the public benefit and available for all will obviously benefit society for the better in general. So it's a good thing, basically, is what we're saying. Increasingly, though, it's the case that open access publishing is now an expectation rather than an aspiration in Irish research publishing. And this is thanks in no small part to the transformative agreements available to Irish researchers. And this point was made by Simon Harris, the Minister for Education, when he was welcoming the transformative agreements that had been signed. And I'll just read what he said. He said, "Supporting research and inclusivity are 2 key objectives of my department. And these transformative agreements mark important progress in both areas. Open access is good for researchers, good for Ireland, and good for all involved in education, or indeed those not involved in education." So just reiterating that point. But transformative agreements aren't the only way to publish your work open access. And I'll hand over to Hugh now, who'll run through some of the other routes available to you.
Thanks, Ruth. That was great. We'll talk maybe a little bit about issues of what they call bibliodiversity before we get into the options available. Because this slide is really interesting. This is a slide from COKI, which is a group in Australia who look at open access. And one of the things that's really interesting, this slide is showing the percentage of Irish outputs by publisher. So where are Irish scholars or scholars in Ireland, more accurately, I suppose, where are they publishing? And if you see the top line there, the kind of pink line, it's Elsevier, so Science Direct, which we know. And one of the really interesting things is the Science Direct deal was the first one of this type that we did in terms of what Ruth has outlined. And you can see very clearly what appears to be a direct correlation between us doing this deal and far greater submission and publication by Irish-based scholars to Science Direct. So we need, because of the way the deals have been kind of spaced out, we need to come back and look at this again. But what that suggests is that you do a deal that is clearly of benefit in all the ways that Ruth has outlined, and it's also of benefit to the publisher. So, I mean, on the one hand, you could argue this gets into a virtuous circle where everybody's winning and it's a rising tide lifting all boats. On the other hand, we need to be very aware that there's a risk that the big players, who in some ways are better positioned because of the profits and so on that Ruth mentioned, they're able to maybe lost lead on open access, shall we say. And by doing that, they hoover up even greater academic output. And of course, we don't want that. We want a competitive market, but also we want a situation where academics can publish across a broad panoply of journals and across all the relevant disciplines. And that's the bibliodiversity aspect. So we don't want Elsevier, frankly, to be the only game in town. And I suppose I would caveat everything I said, but if you look at the graph, it is a very exponential rise, but it's going from 0.2 to 0.3. So it doesn't mean that everyone's going to Elsevier, but what it does mean is that since we've done this deal, a hell of a lot more people are going. And that trend will probably continue. So that's where the bibliodiversity and the alternatives come in. Ruth, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So again, to go back to the COKI dashboard, we have our alternatives. Ruth has mentioned green and gold. We have open publishers. We have Diamond OA. What this shows, and it kind of complements the slide that Ruth had earlier, if you can see there, and I don't know how the colors are showing, but the bars, the green bars, basically, would represent repository-based OA. So for Maynooth, that would be Mural. The red and the gold represent hybrid or gold OA. So what you have here, and this will probably tally with our experience locally, is that publisher-supported open access was very low until comparatively recently. And the reasons are exactly the reasons that Ruth outlined at the start, that an academic submitting had to fund it or find a way to fund it. And so they needed to have funding to do it, or if they felt strong enough, they had to pay out of their own pocket. So there was no great incentive beyond the sort of the benefits which Ruth has ably outlined. And of course, they could submit to something like ArchiveX or into Mural or so on, and they did so in droves. That has continued to grow, which is always welcome, but not at the same rate as what we're talking about today. And again, I think as we go through, if we go back to COKI in a year's time, we'll see that line will only have continued. So basically what you have is submitting with a funded APC in the type that Ruth has been talking about is now a lot easier, is frequently mandated, doesn't bring with it the traditional copyright limitations that would have been the case. So more and more of our colleagues are doing it. And we've seen, I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but I think Ruth, you said over 200,000 euros worth of a spend this year alone in money through the deals. So not money we've paid, but money that effectively happened through the deals. So it's going up. And I know Suzanne is on this call, so it doesn't mean that there's no place for the repository. It means that basically that's still there and happening, but the other one is growing at pace. So if we go on to the next one. So we'll just talk a bit, it's green OA. For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, repositories and preprint servers like ArchiveX, repositories like Mural, that is what we would traditionally call green. There's this thing now, Diamond, and it's free to publish, You don't need a subscription, so it's very attractive. But the key thing is it tends to be funded at scale. So it might be a series of journals or a journal that might be funded by a national entity, state entity, or a large funder, because somebody obviously has to pay for this. That is growing. But I suppose the difference between diamond and gold is the publishers, the traditional publishers, your Wiley, your Taylor and Francis, your Elsevier, they are commercial. So in both diamond and in gold, you would see a situation where the peer review and all that sort of stuff happens and the processes be quite similar. But make no mistake, the commercial vendors are still out to make a profit. They still have their stakeholders and all that, their shareholders and all that sort of stuff. So that has to be funded by somewhere, and that's the deals that Ruth has been talking about. Next slide again, please, Ruth. So that's really it. I mean, over the 30 minutes, hopefully we've kind of outlined the options that are available. It's really hard to stress how many, through the good offices of Maynooth and IRL, how many journals are now available to do this. It is tens of thousands of journals that are available. I think Ruth has really ably outlined this is good for an academic. Your research will get disseminated far and wide. The citations, as Ruth has shown, will go up. It's good for your readers. It will lead to more rigorous academic engagement because of a broader cohort. I think that the point about inclusivity is really, really important. And I mean, COVID is a perfect example. But also we have responsibility to the global south, where people can't necessarily afford the very costly subscriptions to academic journals. Counterpoint to that would remind people about bibliodiversity and the need not to put all our eggs in one basket. So we shouldn't be entirely funding going down the gold route or diamond or something of that nature. We need to have other options, and central to that is things like infrastructure, so being able to support different types of open access. And ultimately, I suppose there isn't, I think there was probably an idealized version that this would all sort itself out over 5 or 10 years. It isn't the case, unfortunately, because we still are working with commercial vendors. They're not necessarily the enemy, although we disagree with them a lot, but there's no way of knowing precisely when all of this will become cost neutral and everything will be available openly to everyone. So for the moment, hopefully we've outlined the different options. And as Ruth said at the start, if anyone has any queries, you know where we are. So that is it from us. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, we can address them.